The Billionaire's Test. CEO disguises himself as a homeless man to interview his top staff. Their reaction is shocking. On a cold October morning, a billionaire made a decision that would destroy everything he thought he knew about success. This is the story of how one disguise, 3 encounters, and $60 changed an empire forever. Nathaniel Brooks sat alone in his corner office on the 47th floor of the building that bore his name. Outside, the city sparkled with possibility. Inside, he felt nothing but emptiness. At 42 years old, Nathaniel had achieved what most people only dream about. His company, Horizon Technologies, employed over 3,000 people across 6 continents. His personal net worth had crossed $3.7 billion the previous quarter. Forbes had named him one of the most influential CEOs in America. His signature appeared on patents worth hundreds of millions. His face had been on magazine covers. But on this particular Tuesday evening, as autumn rain began to fall against the floor-to-ceiling windows, none of that mattered, because tucked inside his jacket pocket was a letter that had appeared on his desk that morning. No envelope, no return address, just 3 sentences written in careful handwriting on plain white paper. It read, "Mr. Brooks, you've built an empire of glass and steel, but can you see the people inside it? You've accumulated billions, but have you lost something priceless? When did you last look into the eyes of someone who couldn't do anything for you?" The letter wasn't signed. Nathaniel had shown it to his head of security, who'd found nothing, no fingerprints, no DNA, no security footage of anyone entering his office. Whoever had written it had simply vanished, like a ghost delivering a message from his own conscience. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his father, Martin Brooks, a postal worker who died of a heart attack when Nathaniel was just 19. His father had worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years and died with $800 in his bank account. But Nathaniel remembered something his father had said weeks before he died. They'd been watching the news together, a story about a corporate scandal, executives who'd stolen millions from their employees' pension funds. Martin had turned to his son and said, "Nathaniel, if you ever become successful, promise me something. Promise me you'll remember that money shows you who you are, not who you should be. Character is who you are when nobody's watching, when nobody can reward you, when nobody can punish you. That's when you meet yourself." At 19, Nathaniel had nodded, barely understanding. At 42, sitting in his empty penthouse with a city of 8 million people below him, those words felt like a prophecy he'd failed to fulfill. So Nathaniel made a decision so unusual, so risky, so potentially devastating that he told no one, not his wife, who'd divorced him 2 years earlier because she said he'd become a stranger, not his executive team, not his board of directors. He would go undercover. He would disguise himself as the one thing most people worked their entire lives to avoid becoming: invisible. He would become homeless, and he would test the very people he'd trusted to build his empire. It took 3 days to prepare. Nathaniel hired a Hollywood makeup artist, paying her $50,000 for her work and her absolute silence. They met in a rented apartment across town, nowhere near anywhere Nathaniel might be recognized. The transformation was remarkable. Prosthetics added 20 years to his face. Makeup created the weathered skin of someone who'd lived outdoors through countless winters. His perfectly maintained hair became gray, unwashed, matted. His hands, which received weekly manicures, were stained with dirt, nails cracked and broken. But the details mattered most. The makeup artist created scars on his arms from fictional accidents. She stained his teeth. She gave him the slight tremor of someone suffering from malnutrition. When Nathaniel finally looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize himself. Staring back was David, a 50-year-old man who'd lost everything. The night before the experiment, Nathaniel sat in that rented apartment, wearing clothes he'd purchased from a thrift store, smelling of the streets he'd soon walk. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt afraid. Not of losing money, not of business failure, but of something deeper, the fear that he was about to discover something terrible about the world he'd created. He had no idea how right he was, or how one young woman would save him from drowning in that terrible truth. Friday, October 15th, 8:47 in the morning, Nathaniel stood outside the Horizon Technologies building, dressed as David, invisible among the morning rush of pedestrians. His hands shook, not from the makeup tremor, but from genuine nervousness. The plan was simple. He would approach 3 of his top executives. He would ask for help, nothing dramatic, just small acts of basic human kindness. He would see what happened. He told himself he was conducting research, gathering data, but deep down he knew the truth. He was searching for proof that he'd built something good, that the people he'd elevated to positions of power still possessed the basic decency he hoped defined his company. The first executive emerged from the building at 8:49. Victoria Ashford, 38 years old, Chief Operating Officer. Nathaniel had hired her 4 years earlier after she'd given a TEDx talk titled Leading with Empathy in the Digital Age. She'd impressed him with her passion for creating humane workplaces, for seeing employees as whole people rather than human resources. She wore a silver pin on her lapel every single day, a pin that read, "Kindness Matters." Victoria emerged from the revolving doors, Bluetooth earpiece already in place, designer coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She was in the middle of a conversation, her voice sharp and efficient. Nathaniel, as David, positioned himself on the sidewalk, directly in her path. He made himself smaller, shoulders hunched, hands clasped nervously. "Ma'am," David's voice came out weaker than Nathaniel intended. "I'm sorry to bother you, but—" Victoria's eyes never left her phone. "Not today," she said, her voice carrying the practiced dismissal of someone who'd learned to say no without breaking stride. "Please," David tried again, reaching out slightly, not touching, just gesturing. "I just need directions to the nearest." "I said no." This time Victoria's voice was sharp, cold. She finally looked up, but not at David's face, at his clothes, his appearance. Her expression shifted to something between disgust and annoyance. "There's a shelter on 5th Street, 3 blocks that way." She walked away. Nathaniel counted. 47 steps from the moment he spoke to the moment she disappeared around the corner. 47 steps, during which she was in the presence of another human being who needed help. Not once did she make eye contact. Not once did she break her phone conversation. Not once did the woman who wore a pin that said, "Kindness Matters," show any kindness at all. Nathaniel stood there, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, invisibility, complete and total invisibility. And it occurred to him that this was what his father must have felt every single day of his working life, the invisibility of being someone who didn't matter to the people who had power. But Victoria's dismissal was nothing compared to what came next, because the second executive was someone Nathaniel considered family. At 9:17, Leonard Pike emerged from the building, surrounded by a small entourage of junior executives, all laughing at something he'd said. Leonard, 51 years old, Chief Financial Officer, but more than that, Leonard had been there from the beginning. 22 years ago, when Horizon Technologies was just 2 guys in a garage trying to revolutionize cloud computing, Leonard had been the other guy. They'd survived on ramen noodles and hope. They'd maxed out credit cards together. They'd worked 100-hour weeks, believing in a future that everyone else said was impossible. Leonard was the godfather to Nathaniel's daughter. They'd stood beside each other at Martin Brooks's funeral. They weren't just colleagues, they were brothers. Nathaniel watched Leonard approach, laughing loudly about some corporate victory, his expensive suit tailored perfectly, his shoes probably costing more than David's entire imaginary wardrobe. The entourage around him laughed at his jokes, agreed with his observations, orbited him like planets around a sun. David stepped forward, positioning himself at the edge of the sidewalk. "Excuse me, sir, Mr. Pike." Leonard stopped walking. The use of his name had caught his attention. He turned, looking for who'd spoken, his eyes scanning the crowd before finally landing on David. "Do I know you?" His voice carried genuine confusion. "No, sir," David said, keeping his voice humble, respectful. I used to work in tech. 20 years ago. I lost my job when my company downsized, and I've been trying to get back on my feet. I heard Horizon Tech was hiring, and I thought maybe someone could just look at my resume, give me some advice about." Leonard's expression changed. The confusion melted away, replaced by something uglier, disgust. He took a step back, as if David's poverty might be contagious. "You heard wrong," he said, his voice loud enough that people on the street turned to look. "We don't hire people who smell like a dumpster." David felt the words like a physical blow, but he pressed on because Nathaniel needed to know if this was real, if his Leonard, would actually do this. I have skills, sir. If someone could just look at my..." "Listen, buddy." Leonard's voice grew harder, performing now for his audience. "You want charity? There's a church 3 blocks that way. You want a job? Try McDonald's. But don't stand in front of this building smelling like you haven't showered in a month, bothering people who actually work for a living. Now get lost before I call the cops." Leonard turned to the security guard standing near the entrance. "Eddie, make sure this guy doesn't come back here, ever. Add him to the list." Nathaniel stood there, frozen. The security guard looked at him apologetically, but didn't move to enforce Leonard's order. Not yet, at least. People streamed past, carefully avoiding eye contact with the homeless man who'd just been publicly humiliated. And Nathaniel understood something that cracked his heart wide open. This was Leonard Pike, the man he'd trusted with billion-dollar decisions, the man who gave $10,000 to charity every Christmas and made sure the press knew about it, the man who spoke at conferences about ethical leadership and compassionate capitalism. And when faced with another human being who needed simple dignity, Leonard had chosen cruelty. He'd chosen to feel powerful by making someone else feel small. But it was worse than that, because as Nathaniel watched Leonard and his entourage walk away, laughing again about something trivial, he realized something devastating. This wasn't Leonard changing. This was Leonard being exactly who he'd always been, to people who didn't matter, to people who had nothing to offer him, to people who were invisible. Nathaniel had just never been invisible before, so he'd never seen it. He almost ended the experiment right there, almost called it off, went home, tried to forget what he'd learned. But something, maybe his father's voice, maybe simple stubbornness, maybe fate, made him try one more time, and that decision changed everything. At 9:43, a young woman emerged from the building. Nathaniel, still shaken from Leonard's cruelty, barely noticed her at first. She wasn't part of his test. He didn't recognize her, but she would become the most important person in this entire story. Her name was Elena Reyes, 26 years old. She'd been working at Horizon Technologies for exactly 8 months and 12 days, not that Nathaniel knew this. She was a level 1 software developer, salary $68,000 a year before taxes. Her badge photo, had Nathaniel ever seen it, showed a young woman with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail, brown eyes that looked tired but kind, and a smile that suggested she'd learned to find joy despite having plenty of reasons not to. Elena walked quickly, backpack slung over one shoulder, eating an apple, white earbuds playing something Nathaniel couldn't hear. She was running late, not dramatically late, but the kind of late that meant she'd have to skip her usual coffee stop. She had a presentation at 10:15 that she'd stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting, and her daughter Sophia had woken up with a nightmare at 3, and the morning had been chaos, and she was tired, so incredibly tired. Which is why what happened next was so remarkable. David stood on the corner, still reeling from Leonard's words. He was about to walk away to end this horrible experiment when Elena passed within a few feet of him. Something made him speak. Maybe desperation, maybe hope, maybe just the need for one person, just one, to prove that humanity still existed. "Excuse me, miss." Elena stopped, not reluctantly, not with the resigned sigh of someone being bothered. She just stopped. She pulled out one earbud and turned, giving David her full attention. When her eyes actually met his, not glancing past or through him, Nathaniel felt something in his chest break open. "Oh yeah." Her voice was friendly, genuine, no judgment in it. I'm sorry to bother you." David's voice cracked, and Nathaniel realized he was actually emotional. "You work at Horizon Tech." Elena looked down at her badge, then back at David, and something shifted in her expression. Concern, real human concern. "I do. Are you okay? Do you need help?" 3 words, 3 simple words that no one else had offered. "Do you need help?" Yes." David's carefully rehearsed story nearly fell apart. "I have a job interview. Not at your company down the street at Sterling Solutions. But my phone died, and I don't know exactly where their office is, and I'm going to be late, and I haven't had an interview in 3 years, and I can't mess this up." Elena was already pulling out her phone, already typing. "Hey, slow down, what's the company name again?" "Sterling Solutions, on West Avenue somewhere." Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "Okay, I've got it. It's about 15 minutes from here on foot." She looked at her watch, 9:45, then back at David. "When's your interview?" 10 o'clock. Elena did the math. 15-minute walk, 17 minutes until the interview. Her expression changed, not to annoyance that this would make her late, but to determination. "You'll never make it walking, come on." "What?" "My car's in the garage, I'll drive you." Nathaniel, hidden behind David's disguise, felt the world tilt. "No, I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm offering. Come on, we're wasting time." What happened in that car during the next 12 minutes would haunt Nathaniel Brooks for the rest of his life, but not in the way you'd think. Elena's car was a 2009 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on the odometer. The check engine light was on, had been on for 6 months, because fixing it cost $400 Elena didn't have. There was a child's car seat in the back, purple and pink, with a stuffed rabbit tucked into the harness. Cheerios were scattered across the floor mat. A picture of a little girl, maybe 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, was taped to the dashboard. As Elena navigated through traffic, she glanced at David. "I'm Elena, by the way, what's your name?" "David." "David, okay." She changed lanes smoothly, efficiently. "Tell me about this interview, what's the position?" Nathaniel had prepared an entire backstory, fictional job, fictional qualifications, all carefully constructed. But sitting in this young woman's worn car, seeing the Cheerios on the floor and the picture of the little girl, something in him couldn't maintain the complete lie. He told her something closer to the truth. "IT support, entry level, it's been a long time since I worked. I used to have a good job, good life. Then my wife got sick. Cancer, the medical bills." David's voice broke, and this time Nathaniel wasn't acting. "We lost everything, the house, savings. She died 3 years ago. I've been on the street since then." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm so sorry, I can't even imagine." "You're very kind to help me," David said quietly. "It's just a ride, David." "It's more than that. I've been invisible for 3 years. You're the first person in months who's actually looked at me, actually seen me." When Elena spoke again, her voice was softer. "When I was 17, my mom kicked me out. I was pregnant, no job, no money, nowhere to go. I slept at the bus station for 2 weeks. I thought that was it. 17 years old and my life was over." She paused at a red light, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "One night this woman sat down next to me, never got her name, she bought me dinner, gave me $80 and an address for a women's shelter, told me when you can, pass it on. She didn't lecture me, didn't ask my story, just helped. So," Elena glanced at David and smiled, "I'm passing it on."